Let's cut to the chase. This tutorial is mostly about the new VDB Voxel node and how it can be used to render particles. But first, a word from our sponsor.
Do you suffer from a lack of cache? Have you lost everything in one careless click of the mouse? Modo 901 is here to help with new, improved, persistent cache. Remember that sinking feeling? You've just run a complicated and lengthy simulation, and the result is sitting cozily in your cache. Then, in a moment of inattention, you decide to run the simulation again. In 801, that's a real "do" moment. But in 901, relax, chill, take it easy. The cache is intact and unchanged. When you really need to clear the cache, simply select Particle Simulation and Clear Simulation Cache from the Dynamics menu. We now return you to your regular programming.
There are already many ways to render particles. We can use volumes, or sprites, blobs, and replicators. We can even use texture replicators to visualize our particles. If you convert your particles into curves, then you can render those curves directly. The VDB Voxel gives us yet another option. So let's check it out. So where do we find this thing? It's in Add Item, Other, VDB Voxel. It's not easy to say that. Add the item into the schematic and link it up to our particle simulation. Let's run the simulation to give it something to chew on, and click on Generate Voxel Mesh. Well, nothing happened because we're at frame 0 and there is nothing at frame 0. But on frame 1 we have some particles, and the VDB Voxel has essentially constructed a sort of sphere of influence around those particles and then turned those combined spheres of influence into a surface comprised of triangles. Let's scrub through the timeline and see that as the particle system expands, we get more and more of our VDB Voxel surface. Now you can control the behavior of the VDB Voxel using some of these settings over here. We can adjust the particle radius, which is no surprise. As you wind that up, the particles get bigger. This acts as a sort of scale factor over the particle's intrinsic size. The Voxel Resolution determines how fine the subdivision of the surface is. So as you wind this up, you'll get more and more triangles. I find that having fewer triangles can often give better results because the surfaces tend to be coarser and more smooth. The system gives you some feedback as to where the voxels are. A voxel really is just a three-dimensional version of a pixel. It's a cube in space. And the VDB Voxel has a sort of hierarchy of these cubes which it uses to turn these particles into surfaces. We can turn the grid off if it's too distracting, and you can highlight the mesh if you want. So let's put that back to default. The filter mode controls precisely how this surface is extracted, and often the effect is quite subtle. So if we change it to a mean, you can see that the surface changed very slightly, but not drastically. Gaussian, median. Median is probably the slowest of the methods, but in this case there really isn't much difference. Okay, that's the basics of the VDB Voxel. The other thing to be aware of is that Modo attempts to cache these surfaces to make their access quicker as you scrub through your timeline. Sometimes there isn't enough memory to store this cache, and sometimes it does seem to get a little bit confused, in which case you can control whether or not to use the cache. Either none, fast or full will give you different behaviors, and you can adjust how much memory you want to devote to this cache. If things are going a bit weird, you can clear the cache and get back to an empty cache. That's what clearing cache means, after all. Supposing we want to render this rather hideous looking object. Well, it's not geometry in the sense that we know it. It's not like geometry that we've modeled. So the only way that we can apply materials to this is to apply an item mask. So if we right click on the VDB Voxel and then create an item mask for it, we then find it in the shader tree, and we can adjust the properties of the surface. So we can make it pink or purple. And obviously we can apply any sort of material in this way. So this is all well and good, I hear you cry, but why is this any better than using, say, blobs to do exactly the same thing? Well, one of the primary advantages of using the VDB Voxel is it's a lot faster. This sequence was rendered using blobs. As you can see, it's quite nice, but it took me about 5 hours to render this rather short sequence. This second sequence, which I've tried to make look fairly similar, was rendered using the VDB Voxel feature, and that only took about an hour to render, so you can see that there's a big advantage, and if I put my mind to it I could probably make the render look a bit closer to the results we got from the blob. As it is, I think it looks reasonable anyway. As well as its speed advantages, the VDB Voxel node can produce some intriguing and organic sorts of shapes, and it would be useful if we could use these as the basis for further modeling. To do this, we need to bake the mesh into an editable surface. In fact, that's very straightforward to do. We select the VDB Voxel and then navigate to Geometry and Bake Geometry Cache. Click OK, and we now have a baked version of our VDB Voxel in this baked geometry folder, and that's the surface. So now we can get rid of our VDB Voxel, and we have a surface that is just like any other one, which we can apply our normal modeling operations to. For example, we can sculpt the surface. I'm not sure that's a great improvement. So there you have it. As always, I hope this is useful to you, and thanks for watching, and watch out for some more tutorials in the near future. Bye.